Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I'm Ute Gunzenheimer. I'm the Secretary General of the EOSC Association, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to this event we're organizing together with the Swedish University for Agricultural Science, the SCA office here in Brussels, as well as we are our mandated organization in the EOSC Association. And with that, I hand over to our Master of Ceremony, Caroline Sundberg, who is the head of the SCA office here in Brussels.
Not really. Cliffhanger. I just was promoted. No, my name is Caroline Sundberg. I work for the Swedish University of Cultural Sciences here in Brussels. Yes. However, we are a collaboration of the 7 universities in south of Sweden, which is primarily Skåne, but there's also other regions. Nothing to tell more about that today. The focus is open science, and let's focus on that. Today we will hear both the perspective of the mandated organization. We will also hear the European, like the national perspective from the mandated organization. We'll hear the European perspective, and we will hear the perspective from the higher education institution. A little bit cocky and bold, of course. We said we accelerate the transition to open science, best practice, and possible pathways for impact. We also have a data manager here in the room, so that is also good to know. So if you want to have the full chain of who is involved in this, we have them all here present, and I hope that you want to mingle with them afterwards. This conference or this session here on how to accelerate the transition to open science is part of the build-up to the Swedish Presidency conference on the potential of research data. Which will take place in Lund later this month. So today we will hear first and foremost Carl, and then we will hear Sumitra, and then Anna. I will introduce their presentations afterwards when it's time for them to speak. But good for you to know is that there will be a possibility for you to ask questions after each presentation. So if you have a question, save it. There will be a possibility for you to ask it. The session is recorded, which is also good for you to know. So if you don't want to be a part of this recording, please move to the side. And also think about it that when you ask your question, and if you don't want to be part of it, please ask a friend to ask the question. Because when you have the microphone, you will be recorded. Huh? So just think about that if you don't want to be recorded, but hopefully you want to be, because this is about open science and open data. So hopefully we want to work for transparency. But we respect your choice. So, with no further ado, let's start with the European perspective, should we? Like, it's the best to start with the European level, and then we move downwards to the actual ground, and let's see the concrete examples. So our first speaker is Carl Lieben, so EOSC Association President, who will have a presentation on the title of EOSC Advancing Open Science to the Next Level. Carl, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And the most important announcement is that after my presentation, there will be an opportunity to get fresh drinks. So you will not be standing here for 45 minutes listening to presentations and getting dry. We have 2 more presentations after mine. So let's see if it works. It used to work before. It's switched on. We tested it, of course. If you give a lot of presentations, then it pays off to have, let's see, it works, huh? Okay. Welcome, everybody, on behalf of the EOSC Association. As was mentioned, we try to bring the message from the European level, from the country level, and from the perspective of an institution within one of the countries. But let's first look at the context. The context is open science, and the Swedish Presidency has paid attention to this in an open science conference in Stockholm a couple of weeks ago, and will again, in a special framework of the research infrastructures, pay attention to this in Lund next week, and luckily enough I may be there as well. Very nice university town. This is about EOSC helping open science. What is open science? Open science is, of course, the transition to make things as early as possible in the research process available for others, to make it as openly as possible, and to make it as fair as possible. Findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. Many in the crowd will I didn't say cloud. Crowd will understand this. Some of them may not, but then you have to look it up. And this is not only within disciplines, but this is across disciplines. And if you look at the sort of definition, there are no strict definitions about open science. It's about, let's say, enhancing the open access activities, which has been done for many years already, working towards more fair data coming from research, in more general terms, digital objects coming from research, to make them as fair as possible, and embedding the development of citizen science. You could also say making it available for researchers, making it available for a larger audience, and then making it available for the complete population. So we're moving from science as is to science as it should be or will be, depending on how you call that. But there's a number of boundary conditions. If there is no change in the rewards and recognition system for researchers who do this work, it's not going to work. If there's no support and training for all the extra work it takes, it's not going to work either. And if there's no community engagement, it's not going to work for the community in the end. It needs infrastructure. Many countries and many places have that, but many countries and many places don't have that, or have not sufficient of that. And finally, it needs policies and regulations. Some people start with the policies and regulations. I tend to put them at the end. So once we've done it, it's good to have policies and regulations as well. It's not completely fair. It has to go hand in hand, of course. And this is about engaging, coordinating, and supporting this development. And the main part of this, in my view, in terms of effort and difficulty, is towards the fair data. This is what EOSC is emphasizing on in the beginning. Ursula von der Leyen called EOSC the web of scientific insight in her Davos lecture a couple of years ago. We call it a web of fair data and services. Fair data is findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable data with 15 principles under it, which I will not explain, and the services that can work on these data sets. It's a federation of existing and future data sources, and it's a virtual space, basically, where science producers and science consumers come together on the web, as I will show you in a minute. Open-ended, like the World Wide Web, in range of content and services. Based, and that's an important one, on the FAIR principles, in order for it to work and to be interoperable across disciplines and across borders. Meeting, of course, because this is the European part of it, all the European data requirements, and interaction with the rest of the world. If we do this alone, it's of no use. Researchers don't know borders. It has to work worldwide, otherwise it's not going to work at all. So if we look at it, it is computers that together form a network that jointly form the internet. And based on this internet, we have created, the world has created the World Wide Web over time. About 35 years ago, we were just celebrating that very recently. And in this, we could also create the web of fair data, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable digital objects if I make it broader than the word data. That's what I mean if I use the word data. So now the question is, what is the European Open Science Cloud? Well, in our view, the European Open Science Cloud is the European part of this web of fair data. As Europe, we could offer extra services to our researchers. We could create extra interoperability across borders. We could offer services across borders, which are then paid by the countries, by the European Commission, and by the institutions as extra help to our European researchers. What are the guiding principles? Well, the overarching principle is that we do this for research. We don't do this for fun, and we don't do this for the individual researcher, per definition, but we do it for research, and then the individual researcher will hopefully benefit from it a lot. It is multi-stakeholder. If we don't have the research performing, research funding, and, let's say, service providing organizations together, it's not going to work. It is based on openness. And I would say as open as possible, as restricted, or as closed as some say. I tend to say restricted as necessary. You have, of course, private data. You have data that are, for security reasons, not available to everybody. Doesn't mean those data cannot be fair. It means they're not open. So fair data is something else than open data. Based on the FAIR principles, I said so. Federation of infrastructures, I told you a minute ago, and an important one, this has to be machine actionable. The data sets are too large, the data sets are too spread around. We're not going to combine all these data sets in a new cloud. It's not a cloud. So we are going to offer the possibility to find and access these data sets if you have access to them. And that means the machine has to have access to them, and the machine has to know what the data are, what is allowed, no, what is able to do with it, and what this machine is allowed to do with it. This is based, the work we're presently doing as an association, on an MOU we signed with the European Commission, forming a co-programmed partnership where the European Commission promised to put 490 million euros in cash in projects relevant to this development fitting within the SRIA, Strategic Research and Innovation Agenda, and we committed within the same agenda to have 500 million contribution from our institutions in kind, fitting in the same agenda. So the MOU between the European Association on the one hand, and you saw Ute, who is our Secretary General, and the European Commission on the other hand, signed by the European Commission, DG Connect and DG RTD, is having a partnership, and this partnership has a board that talks about the developments and reports about the developments, and we per definition invite the member states into this board because the member states cannot be a member of the association and are on board through an expert group they called the EOSC Steering Board of the Commission, and per definition invited into our partnership. We have a lot of interaction with this steering board as such, independent of the partnership board meeting. It's based, as I said, on the SRIA, Strategic Research and Innovation Agenda, designed some, let's say, 2 years ago, and we're now updating it to version 1.2, but there is a major update coming next year in version 2. And the Research and Innovation Agenda has 3 general objectives, and in the next talk you will hear more about these general objectives. One is open science to become the new normal. This is the long-term objective, of course. Standards and tools and services to be developed in order to do these steps and to do the, let's say, development needed for sharing data, and creating a federated, sustainable infrastructure in order for this to happen. For this, the European Commission uses the framework of its framework programs, and in this case, the research and research infrastructures part of the the Horizon Europe project program, and we are giving on as our part of the MOU advice to the Commission on where to put their money. And it's of course to them to decide where they put their money, but we advise them in what is called the multi-annual roadmap for 2021-2022, which is already running, of course, 2023-2024, which is running at the moment, and then we are now working on 2025-2027, which will probably be 2 periods. So what do we concretely aim for? What is now the aim of the development we're doing? We aim to have research data produced by publicly funded research as fair as possible. We aim for researchers to perform this research such that they make their results really available as openly as possible. And we aim for those researchers to have the help of professional data stewards there where possible and as much as possible in order to do their work on research data management plans and to work towards open science. An important aspect is the interoperability. This is the 3rd letter out of the FAIR acronym. Interoperability within a discipline is one thing, difficult enough. Interoperability across disciplines is extremely difficult, and the interoperability framework to help with this. A simple example, to convert Fahrenheit to Celsius. Some countries work in Fahrenheit, some countries work in Celsius. As long as you understand that and can convert it, there's no problem. EOSC version X and version 0 or 1, depending on what you call it, is being procured at the moment and being created hopefully in the near future, is operational in our view. That's what we aim for at least, in a stable fashion to help and support the research process. The Federation of Data, and that's not the EOSC Association, but the EOSC Federation of Data, is populated with a valuable corpus of interoperable data. Scope is widened to the public and the private sector. So we start, of course, from the let's say, public-funded research, but we extend to the public and private sectors in general. And ultimately, this is to become a valuable and valued resource for a wide range of researchers, for the education, for the public, and also for the private sector, or even the for-profit sector. Where do we stand? We've had about 5 years of developments initiated by the programs of the Commission in different programs and projects, very valuable research, but basically going everywhere where these projects thought things should be going. And we're now in this second phase, 2021-2026, trying to converge with the projects into one development. And as long as we get this minimum viable EOSC running, we can converge further. What are the tasks for the association we are presenting and where I'm the president of? Well, we're doing the outreach to stakeholders, we manage the trademark, we monitor the additional activities, and we contribute this way through the Horizon Europe program and through the ERA actions. And we see as a future development for the association to further develop the governance of the EOSC EU node, as we call now the node being developed, to manage the AI or have it managed, to manage the PID policies or to have it managed, and to manage the interoperability framework and the compliance framework of this system. This is not the case at the moment. This is what we aim for the future. We do this by talking to all kinds of parties, and we do this most recently in what we call national tripartite events, where we invite the governing part of the country, the, let's say, operational part of the country, like the mandated organization, and all the members in that country that are involved, also the non-members that are, let's say, relevant for this, all the stakeholders in the particular country. And if we look at it, we've had 24 countries up till now. We started in the middle of last year, and it sort of exploded. 24 countries initiated to have this with more than 2,100 participants, leading to a lot of information coming from those countries, which you can now find on our website on the national pages. What is the outlook for the future? Well, the outlook is something like this, or if you plot it on the European scale, it's something like this. I'm not covering all the countries carefully enough. I have to draw a new network. But what basically I'm trying to show here, this is a network of nodes where it starts with an EOSC EU node, where countries can have nodes, more than one more likely, where research infrastructures can have nodes, where thematic services can have nodes, etc. This, as I said before, has to be done at the global scale. And it can only be done at the global scale if we now do it from this moment on or from the past already in interaction with the rest of the world. Now, we don't orchestrate this for Europe, and we is the association, let alone for the rest of the world. But we can talk to the rest of the world, and we can influence the rest of the world, and we can show them what we're doing. And usually as a response from other regions in the world, we get, please continue in Europe with what you're doing. We will take over, not over, we will copy later on what you have been doing, because this is needed in our region as well. Literally cited from the United States under Trump. And this is better nowadays because they have invested quite a lot of money in this direction. So the association works with other regional initiatives towards the common goals of open science, driving this global convergence slowly but steadily. We are involved in the Global Open Research Commons. We are involved in the Global Open Science Cloud, as it is called, a Chinese initiative. And we're part of OSCAR, the Open Science Commons, we call it, Open Science Commons Executive Roundtable. The service providers from third countries can already join today. They can offer their services in the near future through this system as long as they comply with the rules of participation and, in this case, the European legislation. Data Together, which is the combination of CODATA, GoFair, RDA, and the World Data System, already joined forces in order to join these initiatives. So, how does EOSC help to get to open science? Getting ahead of the curve, advancing to the next level. This was the topic of today I was given. So we have to take advantage of what's going on in Europe and in the national policy making. We have to understand the evolution that is taking place in the objectives the funders require from organizations and from individuals. We have to realize that FAIR is the most important underlying principle of all of this. We have to educate and train the trainer, educate our staff and train the trainer, an important process, because you cannot expect all researchers to understand all details of this. You have to create, as far as I'm concerned, digital or data competence centers in institutions, in countries, and at different levels. The important thing is to coordinate different initiatives in the countries, between the disciplines, and to work together. And joining this powerful movement is ultimately leading to a hopefully successful EOSC. Thank you for your attention. And now there's time for questions.
Yes. Do any spontaneous questions? Of course, there will be a possibility to talk with you afterwards. You're staying, yes. Right? Yes. To have a drink with you is also possible?
2 drinks is also possible.
2 drinks is also possible. Okay. So if there is no hands in the air, as I cannot see, there is one hand there. Yes. Please introduce yourself when you get the microphone and then your question.
Thank you very much, Carol. Mattias Björnman, Secretary General of CSAR. And of course, the very great developments by EOSC and the EOSC Association as always, so warmly welcomed all these updates. My question is on the thinking and how it's been developing around who gets to set the standards in this field. And I know in the past, I'd say a year ago, 2 years ago, EOSC was considered by some as one among many players doing this, while from my perspective it was clear that EOSC was the place where standards were supposed to be advanced here, and others could join in and be part of it. But it was not one among many. It was the place where you're driving this to create this fair web of data. But curious to hear if this has advanced also with the member states, with the Commission, etc. Thank you, Carol.
Thank you, Matthias, for this question. A very good question. We are, according to me, not setting the standards, but stimulating that standards are being set by disciplines, across disciplines, and for the, let's say, translation of those standards. I gave you the simple example of Fahrenheit and Celsius. And this translation is part of the interoperability framework. And I think the association should be in charge of the interoperability framework ultimately. So setting the rules, not setting the standards.
Thank you very much. I see that it's warm, so please take a time now when we're having the little bridge between the speakers to get something to drink or decide to stand outside or inside, just as it is maybe... Wonderful. But before we get to network with one another, I would like to introduce our second speaker for today. So we move from the European level to the national level and to the mandated organization in the association in Sweden, which is the Swedish Research Council. Here today we have with us Sumitra Velupalli, who is Senior Research Officer at the Council. You will talk about the Swedish Research Council and EOSC. So what do you do, but also what do you do besides implementing the EOSC policies? What do you do from the Swedish context? The floor is yours.
Thank you. I think I'll give you a few more minutes to fill up your drinks. And then after I've spoken, I'll have one too. Okay. Shall I? Yep. Okay. Even closer. Better? Okay. So just to introduce who we are, the Swedish Research Council, you might not all know. We are the largest governmental research funding body at Swedish universities, colleges, and institutes. But we also advise the government on research policy, and policy work in this case is very important. But the main aim, of course, is to work to ensure that research really benefits society. And as Karel mentioned, Sweden has the presidency of the Council of the EU at the moment. And what's interesting in this context is that there's a big focus on research data and research infrastructure. So this is really on the agenda, and that's a really important thing. And the aims here too is to help accelerate the transition to open science, to use data from research infrastructures to tackle societal challenges, and well, again, the digital revolution or the evolution, it really creates new opportunities for both publishing and data sharing. So there's been a few activities under this presidency, some of them which have been done here in Brussels. But
in terms of the national perspective, there's been an informal competitiveness council meeting in Stockholm in February, which has led to council conclusions on high quality, transparent, open, trustworthy, and equitable scholarly publishing, which is an important part of the whole open science system as well. And then, as was mentioned by Karel, there's an upcoming conference on the potential of research data, how research infrastructures provide new opportunities and benefits for society, coming up in Lund next week, which is also an important meeting to really set this agenda on a political level, let's say. So, but what do we do except for funding projects and other things as a research funder? Again, we also do a lot of policy work, and within the area of open research and open science, we have 2 commissions by the Swedish government. One is to coordinate, follow up, and promote collaboration on the national work on open access to research data. The other is to coordinate and promote the Swedish engagement in EOSC. So in the context of EOSC, we are the mandated organization, as was mentioned, but we also support the governmental representation as an expert state agency in the steering board. So we have kind of 2 hats here. Just to give some context nationally, there's also other initiatives and commissions by the government. So there's a commission to the National Library on open publishing, and there's also a commission to the National Library on developing national guidelines for open science. So there's activities in other state agencies as well, but the focus on research data is in our remit. So why do we on a national level think that participation in EOSC is important? Well, one, of course, is to align the work, the national work on open access to research data with EOSC, but it goes 2 ways, of course. So EOSC can also help push the national work forward, which is something we would like for it to be. It is part of the national strategy for participation in Horizon Europe, so it's an important written kind of statement in that sense. But it's also an opportunity for the Swedish research community to actually contribute to this vision of an open science system and to participate in this time, which is kind of crucial. So just some high-level examples of some of our activities in this area. I'll give some more concrete examples in relation to the general objectives of EOSC. But we produce recommendations and guidelines to key stakeholders. We try to both create and support initiatives that contribute to increased knowledge and cultural change. We also promote the long-term usability of research data, including fair data management and data management plans. We support organizations that are engaged in EOSC, and we also have an appointed external reference group for open access to research data and EOSC, where the purpose really is to get help from the community, but also for us to through that, try to support the community in the country. So in relation to the general objectives that Karel mentioned before, for the first one, open science becomes the new normal. We have produced recommendations on open access to research data that are available to everyone. We have had some initiatives that contribute to increased knowledge and cultural change. So we've organized seminars and hearings to try to get the discussion going on the national level as well. We have written a handbook on open access to research data, and we're also looking at this aspect of incentives and merits for open access to research data more internally at the moment, but it's an important part of boosting this transition also. In terms of the general objective 2 around standards, tools, and services, so we as a funder require that projects that are funded through us have a research data management plan. So that's an instrument to try to get these used more. We also coordinate research data management plans through, through services. We have developed criteria and recommendations for fair research data, and we're trying to monitor these processes, especially in different disciplines. So as Karel mentioned too, there's differences between disciplines, of course, but also needs to have these cross-cutting basic kind of guidelines, let's say. And in terms of the third objective on sustainable and federated infrastructures. So one of the main things that the Swedish Research Council does is to fund research infrastructures as well, some of which are so-called e-infrastructures, or infrastructures that are directly relevant to EOSC, like the Swedish National Data Service. We also have specific requirements for these research infrastructures to support open access to data. And I might be speaking very quickly, but let's see. So in terms of, so this is kind of the EOSC work, and we have these two branches. We also have this commission on the national work and to monitor what the status is in the country. So we have the assignment to map, analyze, and follow up or assess the status in the country. And to work on this, we have developed indicators so that we can follow this up through over time. And we've kind of, to understand how these indicators are filled, we have had surveys and hearings to key stakeholders. And key stakeholders here are quite many. So there's, of course, the researchers themselves, but also research performing organizations, research infrastructures, research funders, and others. And so we're looking at mainly these 5 focus areas, looking at how is the strategic work going in these stakeholder groups? Are there strategic directions in place or not, or what are the plans for them? Is it implemented in the organizations, and if so, in what way? What are the initiatives around knowledge building and awareness? How is data management supported in different ways, and also the system of incentives and merit systems? So this is quite new in our agency. Our first mapping exercise was last year, so we have a few example results from last year. And so this is just a kind of a positive note to say that what we've found from the responses from researchers is that research data is actually made openly available, in this sense, as close as necessary, to quite a large extent. So on average, about half of all the respondents said that they were. As you can see on this graph, though, there's differences between different disciplines. So in natural sciences, there's much more yeses, so that's the red bar. Humanities and arts have, well, it looks differently in other disciplines. So there's naturally those differences, but there's also caution to be made in understanding these numbers. So it's about 274 respondents. It's very likely that these respondents are engaged in these questions already. So we, of course, do not know for all of those who didn't respond what the actual picture is, but it's also still quite positive, we think. But some of the drawbacks, there are many. There's still a lot of work to do, as I'll say also as my final point. But one of the things that we found through that mapping exercise was that there's still a lot of difficulties navigating this landscape of guidelines and recommendations from different actors. There are a lot of them out there, and it's really hard to know which ones to follow. There's a lot of needs still in the community. Support, technical support, other types of support, but also common solutions and infrastructures. And this is where initiatives like EOSC might play a really important role, I think. So to summarize, so this assignment of mapping on the national level is from last year a yearly assignment. So we will follow this up and develop it further, but we do actually have a baseline, which we didn't have before, which is also makes it easier to try to identify where we can make most change in short term and long term. We're working on further coordinating or aligning the national work and the work of EOSC, because I think it's important to combine these. But as I think all of us 3 speakers will say, there's still a lot of work to do on all levels, but it's also moving forward.
Thank you very much. And now is a chance to take one question. Yes, please. And don't forget to introduce yourself before asking the question.
Yes, thank you. Brecht Sanen from Science Europe. Thank you for the presentation. At the start of your presentation, you started with the Council conclusions on scholarly publishing. I just wanted to pick up on that. I think from the research and innovation sector, it's been very positive news. These conclusions have been welcomed across the board as very consequential, very forward-thinking. I just wanted to ask for you then, what your view is of the conclusions as they've been adopted. Are these a success? But also specifically for you as a funding body working in Sweden, how you think that they might influence your work in the coming months and years, what this, I think, political consensus might mean for you as a sectoral organization in the coming years. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, yeah, very good question, thank you. Very difficult to answer and briefly, but good to have it all documented, I guess, as a question. But I guess my reply would also be documented. I think it will, these things take a lot of time, so it's really hard to say how quickly they would actually come to effect and which parts of them. But I do think, especially when it comes to the publishing branch of open science, it's been going on for longer, so I think those changes are already moving quicker than these other aspects of open science. But in terms of how, in practice, to be honest, I'm really hesitant to reply concretely at this point. Sorry about that, but yeah. Thanks, though.
Maybe that's a topic for the bingo afterwards.
Maybe after.
Maybe it is.
Yeah.
Yes. So thank you very much, Sumitra. We move on to the university perspective. Here, live, well, you came from Sweden this morning, so did Sumitra as well. We have Anna Lundhagen, you're a Pro-Vice Chancellor for Collaboration and Environmental Monitoring and Assessment at the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences. We will hear you today addressing the implementation of open science strategy, focus on open data, which has been a baseline of the other presentations too. Anna, are you ready?
Yes.
Yes, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me to this interesting seminar and discussion. And I forgot to say, I think I will start with saying that the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences is, we are working within the area of agriculture, horticulture, forestry, veterinary sciences, and aquatic sciences. And we are performing world-leading research in that. Well, Wageningen is number one, but we are getting there, I think. Anyway, so I'm a Pro-Vice Chancellor, and I'm here because I have responsibility for a specific task that we have, and we are unique in Sweden to have, which is environmental monitoring and assessment, and I will come back to that. So that is a third task that we have apart from research and education. But I will also talk from a perspective of being a researcher and a former head of department. So I'm sort of taking it from the bottom-up perspective. How do we implement this? And I can assure you that what is being done in the EOSC organization and at the European level, and what is being done at the national level, is pushing us to develop in this area, and which I'm very grateful for. And we need to work on all these different levels to make this happen. Yeah, so we have gotten a presentation about the vision and the policies on the European level, and we have also learned that from a Swedish perspective, that the Swedish Research Council are also sort of taking on this task and developing it as well. And last year, 2022, SLU as well, we launched a policy about how to manage and publish openly data. But I want to admit that we did a quite soft launch because at the same time we realized that these documents, they are pushing our community in the direction that we want. But on the other hand, if we launch a policy too early and we don't have the support system in place, then it will be a backlash. And I must admit that we don't really feel we have all support in place. So that's why we're sort of talking more about it as being a vision where we're heading for, and we're working to develop it further. Now, I'm talking about open data, and managing data might first seem like you're putting your figures in a Excel sheet and then publish it, but as we have talked about, it's so much more than that. I mean, there are a lot of different aspects to make sure that you have fair data, and you have data that is actually possible to publish freely and to be used by others. But at the same time, when you're a researcher, of course the management of your data is a very central part of your work, but at the same time, as a researcher, you're supposed to do a lot of things to stay in the position of being an excellent researcher. So the question at the sort of research level is, of course, what's in it for me? And I think all of us can sign on that, of course, the more data that is available in the community, the more research and the more knowledge we can develop. But I would also say that this is a quality driver of our research as well. So having your data in good order and having this quality control is also driving the quality of your own projects, and that is an incentive for the individual researcher, I'd say. Now, being a head of department, and I mentioned that because I think that that position is really crucial as well, because that is the position who is making sure that the rules and regulations are met of the staff that you're responsible for. So a lot of things are going through the head of department, and I think therefore it is a crucial role in this area. But yet, there are so many other everyday things that keeps you busy, so you cannot expect the head of department to get to know what you should do and not do. So the question then could be, what tools do I have? And that's where Sumitra mentioned the data management plan or other developments that are good for a head of department to use. Now, as also was mentioned, the transformation from where we are now to open science is, as was mentioned before, it's not only about getting the infrastructure in place, it's so much about the culture as well, so much about getting it as a norm, as you mentioned. So there is a lot of small steps that needs to be taken. And I would say, I might be provoking when I say this, but I think that in this area, maybe we are best developed in the policy area. In some scientific areas, we are very far ahead, but in some areas, we are not. So there are still a lot of things to do. Now, why am I here? Well, as I mentioned, we have this task of environmental monitoring and assessment, and that means that we have a long tradition. We have had this task since 1997, but one of the oldest data series that we have is 100 years old, where we systematically collect environmental data. The forestry data is the oldest ones that we have. So we have a very long tradition of collecting and curating, managing and publishing data openly, because it is used to aid decision makers to make sort of science-based decisions to reach the global sustainable goals and also the Swedish environmental goals. So here we have already a support function who is used to support the environmental specialists and researchers who are working with these data. So about 3 years ago, when I became a Pro-Vice Chancellor and having this responsibility, I got this task to work on the development of open data. And we realized, of course, that this is something that has to be dealt with from the top level, because it includes not only the scientific community, but a number of support systems. So here we have to have a system where we engage and not create new organizations, but actually creating routines, interfaces, and structures that make sure that the support system who works with the data curation and the IT department and the ones who work with the legal affairs, for example, is working together. So we have set up specific resources for this so that we can make this transition. It doesn't go by itself. And this is our goal. This is how we vision how we will work with it. So our aim is that the researcher or someone else at the university who needs assistance have a front desk that he or she go and meet, and then there's a back office who give support in whatever area is needed. And it is the back office who is actually updated in their specific fields. We don't want to expect the researchers to be the experts. And that expertise can be on a local level or national or international. We should not need to know about it. And we think that the central tool for getting this going is this data management plan that was mentioned, where the researcher needs to fill in this data management plan and get it approved by the head of department. So we think that this system can be a way of making it easy and still get it going. Already now we have a web page where researchers can reach quite easily accessible the information that they need if they want to search for the information themselves. Now, the challenges. There are challenges. We have tried, and we are trying to build up a competence when it comes to the IT competence, architects competence, for example, but also the legal competence. And it's not easy. It's not our market. It's quite difficult to recruit the right competence. And of course, the storage and handling of data. A challenge, but also a possibility, are the translators, as I call them. We need people who speak sort of two languages, where they understand both the language of the legal issues, also the IT issues, and so on. So those people are really crucial to get this going. And then the important thing that we see is the support system. But we also have to be aware of that this is a hard task, and you've already mentioned that. So we have to be realistic, and we have to be patient, so to make sure that we are not sort of driving our researchers and heads of department too far. But I think this is really the way to go. The open science is promoting quality and knowledge development in our community, but we have to share the responsibility, and we have to have appropriate support. So yes, thank you.
Thank you very much, Anna. Do we have an immediate question for Anna? Maybe some question to close the circle from the European going down to the local level again, or local in the sense, of course, it's a national university, but is there any question? Yes, there is a question there. Please introduce yourself before asking a question.
Hi, I'm Anne-Marie Feynman. I'm with Vinnova, Sweden's innovation agency. I'm curious as to how you work with ensuring that the data is not misused, that the wrong people or wrong organizations get hold of it and use it for purposes for which it's not intended.
Well, data that are published openly are also for everyone to use. So we don't control who is using that data. That's not a part of the task to control how the open data is used.
Sorry, just to follow up on that. So do you make any evaluations of the data before you publish it to evaluate whether it's potentially dangerous in some way or open to be misused in ways that are very undesirable?
Well, there is regulations about research that can have double use, but that is a very different area from where I am an expert in. And we do have data security officers who are well aware of that and take care of that.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will just call Carl and Smitra as well. Do you want to join us here? So, it's warm. It's been nice food for thought. We also heard some challenges. So I just wanted to remind you, how do they look like, the ones that came here with examples, but also challenges, so that you have the possibility to discuss with them and learn from them. Because we are here today, we have many different perspectives, everybody with some sort of interest in open science. So I think we have lots of things to learn from each other and to discuss. So let's get use of the time and the community that is here for today. And also, if you want to talk with a data manager, because sometime at the policy level, like myself, here I never met a data manager before this event was planning. So we have Hannah, please wave. If you wonder how it actually is on the ground to implement open science policies, we have Hannah as an expert as well. But if you want to continue the dialogue on the national dimension, how it's going in Sweden, or the European dimension with Carl, more than welcome, or with Anna as a university with a responsibility, more than welcome. Thank you very much for participating and listening in, and enjoy the mingle and learning from one another. Thank you.